And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. Literacy, the ability to read and write, is arguably the single most important factor in determining a person's career arc. For those who can read and write, the range of possible vocations is vast. Even highly skilled, high-paying careers are within reach. For those who cannot, the options are extremely limited. On today's Open Connection, we open our archives to bring you this story from 1992.
Dr. Robert Wilson provides consulting therapy services to several of Kitimat's largest employers. To function in most jobs nowadays, even be able to keep up with basic safety requirements, about a grade 6 reading level is needed. For non-readers in the workplace, this can be a constant source of tension and fear, which often manifests itself in other ways, and sometimes it's difficult to pinpoint the problem.
Now, once I began to move in the area of helping companies deal with problems that they had with workers on site, we became aware of the fact that there were a significant number of employees in various organizations who also had difficulty reading, and in fact, it was quite serious for us because some of them could not maintain a reading level which would allow them to even keep up with the safety requirements in an organization. And you're caught as an individual adult at that point. If you can imagine yourself, you've managed to obtain a job, it's a good job, you've hidden from everybody the fact that you can't read, or you've done what you can to avoid being found out. You do everything you can, and people learn some amazing skills to get by and not read and not let anybody know that they can't read. And here you are in an organization, and they'll have signs up on the walls, on machinery, in any kind of memos that might be sent around, which may be describing some issues related to safety, and they will make the assumption, employers until recently have, that everybody can read. So they'll send all these things out. They'll have these signs hanging up in various locations, and of course there is a percentage in all of these companies of individuals who cannot read. And they end up feeling extremely upset and awkward and uncomfortable in these environments, and it can lead to many other problems which are secondary to the reading problem. A classic example of that is an individual here in Kitimat who for years would not take the tests necessary to get advanced. And we kept trying to figure out, well, what's wrong with this individual? What everybody decided was wrong with this individual is he had an alcohol problem. Indeed, he did have an alcohol problem. But long before that alcohol problem, he had a very serious reading problem. And he began to believe himself to be of much lesser intelligence than his fellow workers. He didn't put forth any kind of effort to acquire the skill because he was actually horrified at the thought of even sitting down and trying to read. He did develop some other difficulties, alcohol being the one in this instance. He went off to a treatment center, and it just so happened in that treatment center, about the third or fourth day into that program, you're required to sit there, and out of that 12-step book from AA, you're supposed to read. They start passing this thing around. You can imagine this man's anxiety as he's sitting there waiting for the book to come to him. And before it got to him, he bolted. He took off. Everybody, of course, in Alcan is saying, well, we did everything we could to try to treat this man, and he doesn't want to be treated. Therefore, what kind of a guy is this? We're giving him all the help we can, and he's not going to stay in the program. Well, it wasn't until then that it twigged that something else is going on here. I mean, this man definitely did want to quit the drinking, and it became apparent on further questioning that he couldn't read. He couldn't read anything. He couldn't read the title of a newspaper or anything else. And that's what was causing a lot of the anxiety, and certainly had led to an awful lot of the other problems that he had been experiencing in his life. These are common problems.
The Kitimat Literacy Project has been up and running for 2 years now. There are 20 locally trained volunteer tutors available to teach non-readers. One of the obstacles that must be overcome is the non-reader's low self-esteem.
They are told early in life, or given the impression early in life, that somehow reading skills and abilities are related to intelligence. And I'm afraid an awful lot of our society end up believing the same myth. The reality is that it is not related to intelligence. In fact, there are some rather bright individuals who had very serious reading problems, among them Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill didn't learn how to read until he was almost a teenager. I don't think any of us would call these people intellectual slouches. These are rather bright individuals, and there are many, many other examples of people. Movie star recently, Tom Cruise, plays in all these movies that kids go to see. A severe reading problem, but extremely bright. The issue of a reading difficulty or a handicap like this has nothing to do with intelligence. Intelligence is quite a different matter. And the tragedy in it is that most of these young people grow up believing that their intelligence is somehow inferior to somebody else's.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Literacy development is a process of learning words, sounds, and language. Children develop literary skills in order to learn to read and write confidently and eventually improve their communication skills overall. Let us return to the archives as Dr. Wilson charts some development of literacy.
Reading is one of the most complex things we do, as both audio and visual information must be paired. The vast majority of non-readers are male, and any primary teacher will confirm that young boys are significantly behind girls in acquiring reading skills in the early grades.
Boys, we find, take much, much longer to get there. We're just talking about normal neurological development. This isn't abnormal. This is the pace of neurological growth in terms of these skills that we're talking about, these particular skills between boys and girls. Top line being females, bottom line being males. Now eventually, if we get on into the teens, these lines cross, and they pretty well stay on even par. Imagine yourself if we can take this row and now talk about kids who are 6, 7, 8, and so forth, and they're now into grade school. These lines are still fairly far apart. But what we've decided to do is that when you are 6 years old, it doesn't matter whether you're a boy or whether you're a girl, you're going to be in grade 1. The girls are going to be at a level at grade 1 where they can acquire the skills that are necessary to pair that visual and auditory message very nicely. And very, very few girls, and you can see this in all of the schools in North America, there are very few girls who have problems learning how to read. They can pick that skill up very quickly. We have a large number of boys. In grade 1, about 25% of the boys are having difficulty acquiring that skill. By grade 3, about 5 to 8% are still having difficulty learning to read. The rest have caught up.
If a young boy has to cope with other problems, perhaps at home, such as abuse or alcoholism, some just never learn the skill. And it's very hard for a person who may have spent years hiding the fact to come out and admit they can't read. But once that step has been taken, if they can get the right type of help in an atmosphere of trust and commitment, they can catch up fast.
The nice thing about working with adults is that they can catch up 6 years of reading skill, frankly 10 years of reading skill, once they get beyond that social problem in a matter of a couple of months. They can go from grade 1 to grade 10 in a matter of a year.
Apart from the program coordinator, none of the tutors are professional teachers, and it can be quite a step to take on the challenge.
There's certainly a great deal of insecurity in my own mind. I think that some of the students lack self-confidence, and I think in my case I lack self-confidence too. I'm not a trained teacher. I went in because I have a strong interest in reading. I think it's a very important skill, and I thought that by becoming involved in the program that I would maybe impart my own enthusiasm for language into somebody else.
And have you been able to do that with your second student?
I don't know, she's so enthusiastic already, I really don't have to worry about motivating her at all. You know, she's really very lively and bright, and I think communicates very well in her own native language, and is rapidly becoming more acclimatized to communicating in English as well.
And if the pairing of tutors and students is to be successful, there has to be a real commitment on both sides.
I spend about an hour to an hour and a half on Tuesday nights preparing a lesson, and meet with my student on Thursdays for about an hour and a half. Sometimes our sessions run a little bit longer than that.
Though the program has been in operation for more than 2 years, it only recently got some federal funding. Till then, it operated with small donations from the community and in space provided by the Community Services Society. Recently, a grant of $25,000 was received from the federal government, and the funds have already been put to good use.
It enabled me to go down to Vancouver, look around, find a successful series of books, successful software that I could purchase and know that it would be of use to the people back here. I was able to do that and spend $2,000. So, and we hope to have these up very, very shortly. There are books covering a wide variety of subjects at a very basic reading level, but of interest to adults.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. The pulp and paper industry consists of manufacturing enterprises that convert predominantly woody plant material into a wide variety of pulps, papers, and paper boards. The Canadian industry began in the 1800s and has undergone revolutionary changes over the years. Let us return our archives to this 1992 story.
Pulp and paper is Canada's biggest manufacturing industry. It's also our biggest export. The industry employs 170,000 people. But pulp and paper companies say they're in a crisis.
Well, I'm not sure I'd want to characterize it as a depression.
But losses are so bad, the only time they've been worse was during the Depression.
We estimate that losses for the industry this year, or for 1991, will total $1.5 billion or more. You compare that to the last recession when the industry lost about $265 million. So you can see that it's a much more severe situation than the last recession. In fact, I think you have to probably go back to the 1930s to find something comparable.
Tough times for pulp and paper companies mean even tougher times for thousands of workers who've lost their jobs. 5 pulp and paper mills have already closed, 3 of them in Quebec. It's not just older mills closing, even new high-tech mills have shut down. More are likely to follow.
Unless there is some relief, I'm saying that it's fair to say that there will be additional mill closures and additional machine closures, which means, obviously, loss of jobs.
The pulp and paper industry has been down before. It's a boom to almost bust business. When times are fat, the companies invest in new plant and equipment. And when that comes on stream, there's oversupply, the market falls again. What's making things worse in this cycle, though, is the double whammy of the recession and our high Canadian dollar. For an industry that exports 80% of its product, the high dollar is a killer. The pulp and paper industry is now lobbying the government to lower interest rates to help bring the dollar down. It says Ottawa's original objective of higher rates, fighting inflation, has already been achieved.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Born in Port Alice, he worked as a millwright and counselor for the city of Prince Rupert. Dan Miller was first elected to the BC legislature in 1986, representing Prince Rupert, and served as BC NDP's forestry critic. In his final segment of Open Connection, we return to the archives as Dan reacts to becoming a forest minister.
Dan Miller had already represented the North Coast for 5 years, but as an opposition member. He's been forests critic, but now he's forest minister at a time when the industry is in crisis. There's no doubt Miller has one of the toughest jobs in the new government.
As a critic, it's easy to criticize. I've always tried to be quite conscious of doing it responsibly. As a critic, I never attempted to say that we should do things that I thought weren't possible. So I don't feel uncomfortable in terms of moving from a critic to a minister. So really the challenge is to deal with issues in a new way, bearing in mind that we have a different outlook, that we have different policies than the previous administration.
The transition of government has been a hectic time for all the new MLAs, but Miller has been faced with difficult issues from the start and little chance to put them off. He's come out swinging against American attempts to place duties on our softwood lumber exports. He's also criticized some environmentalists, saying their statements outside the country are hurting the forest industry. With Miller's new job come adjustments for his entire family as well, but he's confident they'll handle it just fine.
No, my children are all grown. They're all adults. They're not children anymore in a classic sense. And my wife and I, I've indicated before, my wife and I work very closely together. I think you can only survive in this sort of political game if your spouse is your partner. So we've been doing that for the last 5 years, and we work well together, and we'll continue to.
Miller must also forge relationships with his neighboring MLAs. Helmut Giesbrecht in Skeena and Jackie Piment in Bulkley Valley Stikeen are backbenchers, but they have many interests in common with Miller as Northwest representatives, and they have plenty of concerns themselves about forestry.
I've indicated to them and to other MLAs as well that I want them to be used in a substantive way when it comes to dealing with forestry issues. In other words, if there are forestry issues in their constituency, I'm going to listen to their advice. And I've also advised forest companies that I've dealt with that they have an obligation to inform local MLAs about their issues. So I want people in our caucus, those of us or those who are not in cabinet, to play a very useful role in working out some of the very difficult problems we have. And I've got a good reception to that.
One of the first issues Miller and others have heard raised by the new MLA for Bulkley Valley Stikeen is the size of her riding. Like Miller's riding too, Jackie Piment's constituency was expanded when boundaries were realigned before the election. Bulkley Valley Stikeen now stretches to the Yukon border. Serving it will be quite a challenge.
What I'll be doing is trying to think of the constituency itself in terms of areas, the Lakes District, the Bulkley Valley, the Hazeltons, and the Stikeen, and ensure I get to the areas. And definitely the communities within those areas have to be addressed, and I have to visit them. I just have to recognize that it's going to take time, and with the glitches that you have, such as airplanes not landing, you just have to basically go with the flow.
Along with traveling around their ridings, Piment and other MLAs must get used to the frequent trips between their ridings and Victoria. Piment is determined to keep her home base in Burns Lake for the sake of her family, herself, and her constituents. She may rent an apartment in Victoria once the legislature starts sitting, but it won't be a permanent home. She's also making a point of setting aside time for her family when she's in Burns Lake.
And I try to, when I am home, to be with my family. And I think that's important too, that the answer machine goes on, and I give time to my youngest daughter, who's 10 and at home going to school and such, and try and spend that time with her, and of course with my husband as well, and the extended family that lives in my area. But I think really importantly that to try and express what the needs are for myself, and also recognize that my family has some needs too. And it's a bit of a juggle, and I think you have to go all out to begin with to sort of find the space and the time for your family.
Earlier experience with the school board and other community activities have helped Piment learn how to organize her time. But the workings of the legislature will take some time getting used to too. The House can be a loud and nasty place at times, but Piment doesn't expect the yelling and insults to be her style.
When I get up in the legislature, it's going to be my personality that gets up there. My concern right now is where we're going to sit. We were looking at how the legislature was set up. There's, I believe, 30 seats on either side, and there's 51 of the government side, and 75 now compared to, I believe it was 65 before. And so our main concern was where we're going to sit. And once we found that space, I think we'll just we'll create our own individuality in terms of dealing in the legislature.
Helmut Giesbrecht, the new MLA for Skeena, has had experience in another, sometimes unruly environment, high school classrooms. He's not uncomfortable about the career change.
I'm not apprehensive. I think in terms of the job that's there, I was out of the classroom. I've been out of the classroom for some time, doing counseling, and I was out for the 2 years that I was president of the teachers union. So I have some idea of the job that's involved in advocacy work and so on, and keeping a whole lot of fires burning at the same time, and keeping a whole lot of active files on the desk going. So I have some experience with that. This one is going to be considerably different, I would imagine, because the range of issues that will be dealt with will sort of go beyond the local level in a lot of cases. But I wouldn't have set out to do this if I didn't think I could handle it, and that's sort of the number one thing that spurs me on to new challenges. If I think I can do it, then I'll take a crack at it.
Like the families of the Northwest's other MLAs, Giesbrecht's is making some adjustments.
It's sort of come home at this point. I know there's going to be some difficulty. Luckily, my kids, or Sean will be out of high school at the end of this year. Wendy has sort of started in on her own career again. It's going to be some disruption because I enjoy my family life, and we're just going to have to adjust and maybe set aside specific times to carry on with it. I certainly enjoy my recreation. I'll have to figure out how that's going to be adjusted. And some of my buddies that I went fishing with and so on are going to see me a little bit less, but I'm hopeful that it won't change too drastically.
Giesbrecht defeated a social credit cabinet minister, Dave Parker, to win his seat in Victoria. His counterpart in Bulkley Valley Stikeen knocked out a former cabinet minister, Jack Kempf. The election win was an exciting one for NDP supporters, but Giesbrecht has been through wins and losses in municipal politics, and as he gets down to the real work the win has brought him, he tries to take a broader view.
My workers tend to get more excited than I do about the final results. It's a struggle. For me, the exercise in the election seems to be more, I guess if you like, more rewarding than sometimes the outcome, because there's an awful lot of adrenaline pumping at that time, and when it's all over, then there are winners and losers, and I'm sort of comfortable with the winning, but I also have some empathy for the losers, and we're all human beings, and I mentioned that at the victory celebration, that there's some downside to this as well. I experience that in the municipal from time to time, that there are an awful lot of people whose dreams are shattered.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.